All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I am so excited. Welcome, everyone, to the first Bay Area Electrification Expo here in Palo Alto. My name is Christine Tam. I'm a senior resource planner with the Palo Alto Utilities Department. And on behalf of the City of Palo Alto, I'd like to welcome all of you for coming to this expo. I'm so excited. I really didn't expect such a great turnout. First, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you need to use the restroom, it's out the door to your left. You can see the signs to the restroom. If you need to use Wi-Fi, you can connect to the network. There's no password. You just need to sign into it. And there are two rooms on this side of the courtyard, the Matadero room and the Adobe room, and we have breakout presentations and panels in those two rooms later on this afternoon. Let's see, what else? Oh, and in case you wonder what kind of events we have, there are posters outside with the schedule of events so you can see what presentations you'd like to attend. First of all, I'd like to thank all our sponsors for this event. Besides the City of Palo Alto, we have a number of agencies and nonprofits who are co-sponsors to this wonderful event. We have the San Jose Clean Energy, Joint Venture Silicon Valley, Actera, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, Menlo Spark, Silicon Valley Power, and Peninsula Clean Energy. And actually on Saturday, if you enjoy being here and you want to go to another similar event, the City of San Jose is hosting a similar South Bay Electrification Expo on Saturday at the Tech Interactive. That's the Tech Museum. That's what it used to be called. And I also would like to take this time to thank all the vendors and manufacturing representatives that are here today. We have an amazing lineup of vendors, from electricians to plumbers to design firms to software company to help you electrify your home or your building. And then we have vendors with water heating, space heating, the non-gas fireplace, and also outside, we also have other types of services that you can talk to. Our utilities department also have some tables out there, so feel free to speak to any of these vendors. They are here to help you electrify your home, and they are just as excited about this event as I am. So the City of Palo Alto has a long history of sustainability initiatives. We have adopted our first climate action plan back in 2008, and in 2013, the Utilities Department adopted a carbon neutral electric supply, which means that using electricity in Palo Alto has zero greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. And in 2016, the City Council adopted a sustainability climate action plan, which we call the SCAP, with a very aggressive goal of 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. That's 20 years ahead of the state's goal. And we need to do a lot to meet those very aggressive goals. Building electrification is a main strategy to reach our city's sustainability goals. Greenhouse gas, as we all know it, is causing a lot of disasters. There's kind of the threat of power outage all throughout today, starting from yesterday. We didn't even know if we were going to be able to hold this event today. We're all in this hole together, and we all need to do our part to get out of this problem. So I know that, and as a city, we've actually been we've been pushing building electrification since 2016, when we launched a rebate program for helping homeowners convert their gas water heater to heat pump water heater. We also have We also have recently launched an induction cooktop loaner program. So outside, we have a table for Actera. Feel free to talk to the Actera representatives to check out an induction cooktop to see how it works for you. We have an induction cooking demo later this afternoon. It's pretty cool. Definitely check it out. We are currently looking at launching a whole new set of rebates for building electrification next year. So if you have any questions, come talk to me later. And if you live in an apartment building, you may also want to talk to your building owner, because we also have EV rebates available for multifamily buildings. I know that some of you are here and you have already started this electrification journey. And for those of you who you are wearing these stickers that says I'm electrifying. So feel free to talk to anyone who has these stickers. They ask them what they have started electrifying. And for those of you who are interested in finding out what is electrification about and how to go about doing it, do talk to any of these vendors in this room, or talk to anyone who's wearing one of these stickers. We're all here to help and answer any questions. So next, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Bruce Niles. Woo! I'm so excited to be introducing Bruce. Bruce is the founder of Sierra's Club Beyond Coal campaign in 2003. He led the campaign for 15 years to stop the rush for new coal power plants and secured retirement of over half the country's coal fleet. Previously, Bruce worked as a trial lawyer at Earth Justice and also as counsel to the Assistant Attorney General of the U.S. Department of Justice. Last year, Bruce was awarded the Climate Breakthrough Award, a $2 million grant to launch the Building Electrification Initiative with the goal of replacing fossil fuel in 70 million US buildings efficiently. Bruce is currently a senior fellow at the Rocky Mountain Institute. He lives in Oakland with his family, and earlier this year, he co-authored an op-ed piece in the New York Times titled, "Your Gas Stove is Bad for You and the Planet." Bruce also has a short 5-minute YouTube video that narrates his family's journey to converting his home to become all electric. So, everybody please welcome Bruce.
Thank you, Christine. It's a real treat to be here, and I want to start off by noting the historical significance of this gathering. I think it may be one of the very first ever in the entire country of a city pulling together folks who care about climate change, their family's health, and the future of this planet on this very important issue that is right in front of us, how we power our buildings. I'll fully confess, 2 years ago, I knew nothing about this issue. As Christine said, I'd spent my prior decade and a half working on replacing coal-fired power plants. And it never occurred to me that the 4 gas appliances in my Oakland home were the biggest piece of my carbon footprint, other than my flying. And this conversation hadn't started, and it's been this remarkable, rapid transformation of a conversation that's being led at the city level, just like here. But let me back up to sort of why this is so deadly important. So it's been a strange time. The last 6 months, we've had our teenagers around the world reminding us that we are not hitting our carbon goals, and it's having profound climate impacts. A 16-year-old from Sweden is reminding us we don't have 30 years to solve this problem. And in fact, we're down to basically the last decade. So there's an urgency of now, of how are we actually going to get this problem solved. And the beauty of this issue is it's something we can solve without Washington. This is an issue that we can solve quickly and efficiently and make our homes and buildings across our communities even better. So let me share a little of this journey that for me started about 2 years ago. I was in a meeting with some of my colleagues when I used to be at the Sierra Club, and we were talking about coal is done in California. We don't burn any more coal in our there are no coal-fired power plants in California. California phased those out many years ago. But we have a lot of gas that we're still burning in our power plants for about half of our electricity. And we were talking about what is needed to get enough wind and solar and storage online to replace these gas plants. And my colleague leaned over and she says, you know, we're burning more gas in our buildings than we are in our power plants in California. And I thought I'd misheard her. I said, what do you mean? She says, we are burning more gas in our buildings in California than we are in our power plants. And to me, that was this huge revelation, because there's been so much talk about how we green our electricity, more wind, more solar, more storage, more energy efficiency, to make our electricity cleaner. But there hadn't been any conversation around this thing that is right in front of us. And the other crazy statistic she shared with me is, because we live in such a remarkably mild climate here in California, half of that gas used in our buildings is to heat hot water. We're in the middle of an existential climate crisis, and we can't work out how to heat hot water without frying the planet. This shouldn't be that hard. So I embarked on this journey to work out how to do this in my home, and I'll share a little more on that later. But the trick, of course, is that there are 12 million buildings in California burning gas. So while on an individual basis there's this huge opportunity, the work ahead is us all demonstrating at the neighborhood level, at the city level, and then how do we sweep this across the state. But let me ground you into some of the basics around why this is so very important, and then come back to my own experience. So this is just a quick run through of carbon emissions in the United States from the three different problems, the three fossil fuels: coal, oil, and gas. And it used to be conventional wisdom, because it was true that coal was the biggest piece of the puzzle, but it is coming down rapidly. Despite what the current occupant of the White House is trying to do, we are retiring a coal plant a month. Every month in the United States, we are retiring and replacing a coal plant. So coal is actually one of the bright stories across the entire globe. We're cutting coal actually in line with our targets, our climate targets in the United States. And emissions are down significantly because coal has been coming offline, and it's having profound public health benefits as well. However, there are two other big problems, and most of us are familiar with oil and that we use in our vehicles. But the natural gas story has been slow to the forefront, and today it's the number 2 biggest source. So part of the issue with natural gas, it's been branded as clean by the industry for a long time, but it's also complicated because it's burned in 3 different places. So this is where gas is burned across the United States, basically in equal parts: power to make electricity, industrial processes for a whole bunch of purposes, iron, steel, etc., and then buildings. And buildings is the piece that I would argue is the one we can solve the quickest, and the opportunity, obviously, we're all here about today. So I want to point out that there's actually a fascinating geographic story to gas use in the United States. It may be a little hard to see right at the back, but basically on the left-hand side, you can see that gas provides about half of the energy use in buildings in the United States. Red is electricity, and then the last little bit is fuel oil. And there's a fascinating geographic story to this to understand how did we get to a place where we now are burning gas as the primary fuel in California. Basically 30 years ago, we were building a lot of new homes. They were largely electric. We had been promised that nuclear in particular was going to be so cheap that we wouldn't have to meter it. We had very inefficient electric appliances, and people's electric rates started going up. And because the electricity appliances were so inefficient, people's bills were skyrocketing. And what we did here in California and up the West Coast and across the upper Midwest and other cold parts of the United States is we largely switched to gas. They didn't in the Southeast because they had a fairly mild climate and they didn't really believe in that efficiency thing. So today in Atlanta, 99% of multifamily buildings in Atlanta, Georgia today are all electric. More than half of the single-family homes today are all electric, because that's what they've been doing for the last 40, 50 years. Here, we're in the process of unlearning what we did for 30 years, which was to really push gas out. And coming back to my own experience of the electrification of my home, the first 3 contractors I called and said, at the time I was at the Sierra Club, I wanted to get rid of my fossil fuels and replace them with clean electricity. They all said, no, 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 you should stay with gas. Because that's what they knew, that's what we have provided incentives for, and that's where we've been driving for 30 years. But it's a geographic difference. So if you have friends and colleagues, particularly in the Southeast, most of them are familiar with this thing we call induction cooking, which is new to many of us. It's super common in Florida, for example. So anyway, it's a fascinating geographic split. So where are the states, and this is part of the reason I have great hope that we can actually solve this problem quickly. This is the states where they're burning the most gas. Number 1, New York State. Half of that's in New York City. That's 1 million buildings in New York City that are currently burning gas. Number 2, California. Number 3, Illinois. Those are all states that are committed to addressing climate change, and as are most of these states or cities. So when we think about this issue, this is not about a coal plant in rural Nebraska. This is about how we power our cities. And despite action in Washington, or a lack of action in Washington, there's enormous enthusiasm to address this issue at a city level. And that's where all this gas burning happens, in Palo Alto, San Francisco, Oakland, our urban areas. So again, a problem we can fix quickly in places where there's hunger and enthusiasm for climate action. The other issue is, right now we're going in the wrong direction. The American Gas Association has on their website their little favorite statistic that right now, every minute of every hour, 365 days a year, a new customer is added to the gas distribution system. Every minute of every hour, 365 days a year. That is known as losing the war on climate. So when we think about this issue, right now we're full speed ahead in the wrong direction. But the exciting thing is, of course, there's some enormous momentum to address that. But here again is where the states are that have been going the fastest, adding the most new gas customers. And again, it's a pretty exciting list, because these are states where we have a lot of people who care about these issues. Again, California, New York, and even in Texas. If you have friends or spend any time in Texas, there is Texas, and then there's what they call progressive cities, where all the people live. And those cities of Houston and Austin and Dallas all have very progressive enclaves where they're trying to work on solving the climate crisis. That's where most of this gas use is happening. So we here in California have a huge opportunity. We're number 2 in terms of consumption, and we're number 1 in terms of it's growing the fastest. So the other thing I just want to touch on is, so the problem with gas has several problems. One, when you burn it, it produces carbon dioxide. We're all familiar with that. Number 2, 90% of gas is methane. So natural gas could be called methane. It has about 90% methane. And the thing about methane is that it is a super pollutant from a climate perspective. It is 86 times more warming potential than carbon. And why does that matter? Well, it turns out that gas doesn't like to stay in pipes and leaks. And the wellheads in rural Oklahoma, or in the San Juan Basin, or in Southern California, where we do a lot of drilling, are leaking a lot. And so when we think about the impacts of natural gas, it's not just the burning. And if we add up all the leaks, it actually doubles the climate impacts of natural gas. So whenever you hear someone say, well, natural gas is just below oil and it's part of our problem, you should double the numbers because of the methane leakage. And the leakage is at the wellhead, in the pipes, but the newest discoveries are the 2 places it's leaking the most, in many instances, is in our cities, particularly our older cities where the pipes underground haven't been inspected for years, and in our homes. So the California Energy Commission put out a research request last summer and said, we want to know how much is leaking in our homes. Is this a problem in our walls, in our appliances? And it turns out, yes, it actually is. I live about a mile from a very active fault line. My house shakes every couple of months. Who's responsible for the gas pipelines inside my walls? Of course, nobody, and no one ever pulls off the drywall to see if they're leaking. So it turns out, according to the California Energy Commission, we're living in these little bubbles of methane, which it's not known to be a health hazard, but it is a profound climate impact. And when we're thinking about solving this problem, it means not just reducing the burning, but also eliminating the gas and the pipelines. So that makes this to be a fascinating question, which is we need to get all the gas out and decommission the pipes to solve this climate problem. So it's also, this again, so the revelations of the last couple of years, I've worked on air pollution for many years. No one ever said that the gas we're burning in our buildings is a big health issue outdoors. Again, in California, we're burning about the same amount of gas in our buildings as we are in our power plants. But look at this statistic. Over there, power plants are putting out 18 tons of NOx. NOx is the precursor to smog, which plagues Bay Area all the way down to LA. And how is it that buildings are 7, 8 times bigger than power plants and they're burning the same amount of gas? Well, of course, power plants have been regulated for 30, 40 years and they have pollution controls. There's no end-of-pipe pollution control on your hot water heater. So it's burning gas essentially with no restrictions. So this is the inventory from California Resources Board. The pollution that's contributing to smog, buildings, residential and commercial buildings, the burning of gas, is a big contributor to smog as all the light-duty vehicles on California's highways. So as we're thinking about solving two problems, one is climate and one is the fact that millions of us still live in cities where it's unsafe to breathe in the summertime in particular, addressing gas in buildings actually gets you a twofer. Gets you two benefits, reduces asthma attacks and all the problems associated with dirty air, and addresses climate. But here was the biggest revelation of all. My wife loves to cook. She's an awesome cook. She also has asthma. How is it we have not had a conversation around, it's pretty intuitive when you actually think about it. The burning of a fossil fuel inside your home that we've been getting tighter and tighter to address efficiency. And we go to great lengths to make sure when you burn gas in a hot water heater or a furnace, that gets piped outside. Otherwise, it has profound health impacts. So the code requires, if you have a hot water heater that's gas, you've got to have a chimney to get it out of the building. Makes perfect sense. Same if you have a furnace, hot water heater, fireplace, but not the gas stove. So why have we not talked about the health impacts associated with this gas stove? So in doing some digging and talking to some of our colleagues and beginning to understand what's going on here, it sort of all came crystal clear in the last month. I talked to a researcher at the University of Colorado in Boulder. There's all these studies saying this is a really bad thing to be burning gas in our buildings and not be venting it. Why is it we haven't done something about the gas stove? And she says, well, I started working on this issue 20 years ago. My advisor told me then that the biggest issue for indoor air quality in our homes 20 years ago was the gas stove. I said, okay. She said, and we studied it for 10 years. We did all the science, and we concluded it's a really bad idea to be burning gas in your home and not vent it outdoors, and the gas stove is the biggest piece of the problem. I said, well, then what happened? She said, well, the funding ran out because the research funders said, you've answered all the questions, but we've never actually taken any action to address it. So here's the statistic that was a result of a meta-study a couple of years back. They looked at 39 studies that went back to 1979 from the UK, looking at what happens to kids' lungs and their asthma symptoms when you burn gas in a building, in your kitchen. This is just one of the many findings. 42% more likely that a child has asthma if you have gas in a gas stove in your home than if you don't. So that was sort of the final straw for us, like, we've got to get this gas stove out. But it also just is a reminder that fossil fuels are profoundly unhealthy, right? They're bad for the climate, but they're also really bad for our health. So Mary Nichols, who runs the California Air Resources Board and one of the great warriors on clean air. She's been leading the charge on trying to get stricter standards on California cars, despite what the Trump administration is doing. She has this amazing story where someone came to her 10 years ago and said, in order for California to have clean air, to really take LA all the way up to San Francisco and get everyone breathing clean air 365 days a year, we need to stop burning things. There's too many people burning things that collectively are making it so it's unsafe to breathe. And she said at the time that the notion that you were going to say we have to stop combusting gas, oil, and, in our homes and in our cars and our industry was just simply an inconceivable notion. But that's where we are today, because we now have the technology that allows us to do all the things we want to do without burning anything. And it has two amazing benefits. One, it solves the climate crisis. And secondly, it has profound health benefits. So again, in terms of, this is a study from the California Air Resources Board 10 years ago. They looked at a variety of things. They cooked lasagna, they cooked fried chicken, they cooked a stir fry, and they found that in a kitchen, the levels of nitrogen dioxide, which is a pollutant Congress identified 50 years ago as a hazard to public health, and EPA has regulated outdoors for 50 years. 10 years ago, Air Resources Board did some indoor testing and found levels of 400 parts per billion of nitrogen dioxide in a kitchen when you cook fried chicken. The EPA standard today is 100. 100. That's the level set by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to protect sensitive populations, particularly the elderly and asthmatics and children, so they don't have asthma attacks in particular. And we are regularly experiencing levels 4 times higher from simply cooking. So the science on the health issues indoors, to me, was sort of the final straw of, wow, the solution here is pretty straightforward. We've got to get all of these fossil fuels out of our buildings, and we'll all be breathing a lot easier and with profound health benefits to boot. So it's a climate issue. It's a health issue. But let me just touch on the safety issue, because living in a state where we just cut off 800,000 meters for electricity really raises this question about resiliency, and are we ready for catastrophic things that happen, in this case driven by climate change, that we're making smart investments in our system. And there are folks who are saying, well, this underscores that our electricity system is vulnerable, and it is, right? We have a lot of work to do in the state to get out of the situation where we're cutting off hundreds of thousands of meters and over 1 million people. But the other thing that, as we think about resilience and safety, the city of San Francisco looked at what happens if we have another earthquake of a serious magnitude in terms of our ability to get services back online. And the single biggest threat they identified was gas and gas pipelines. If you go back to the 1906 fire that razed San Francisco, it wasn't the earthquake that destroyed the city. It was that the earthquake caused more than 3 dozen fires of the gas system. Gas pipes broke, caught fire, and that's what razed the city. So as we're thinking about these very strange times where we're having electricity cut off and we're thinking about how do we build resilient communities, the last item on safety is San Francisco concluded if they had an earthquake like the Loma Prieta scale, electricity can actually be restored very quickly. You can get wires strung in a matter of weeks. Fixing the gas service they recommend, they identified in San Francisco would take up to 6 months before gas service would get back. So there's also a profound issue around how do we build communities that are able to withstand wildfires and earthquakes and all the other threats that we're facing. You probably all know this, but a lot of people actually don't know where we use gas. This is just a quick snapshot of where we use gas in our buildings. The most common, of course, is space heating and hot water. So that covers in most residential units about 80% of your gas use. But then fireplace, clothes drying, barbecues, hot water, and hot tub are the other areas. And as you're seeing, and I won't spend any time on this because you have a great panel at 4, but also from all the vendors. There are some awesome replacements for all of these gas applications, and they're all in many ways so far superior. Let me just touch on the cooking one. This is an induction range. We were super skeptical because we were used to the old electric coil electric stoves that are very slow and about the least responsive device you could possibly imagine. The induction stove is faster than gas and more precise than gas. It is a much superior product. And then the hot water heater, and there's examples all around here. We just plugged in electric and off we went, and it's providing exactly the same service. Hot water when you need it, without any of the risks of gas. So let me just turn to a couple of cost issues, because there are actually some really important equity issues associated with gas. We're in a housing crisis in California, as you likely all know. We are not building anywhere near enough housing, and it's having profound equity impacts. We have people commuting from the Central Valley over to the Bay Area to work every day. Adding gas infrastructure to a building, a new single-family home, adds about $6,000 to $15,000 per house. So there's a lot of conversation around, is it cheaper or better to go with gas or electric? The statistics in terms of building new construction, hands down, is cheaper. And for three simple reasons. One is getting gas to the building always costs a significant amount. Two, if you have any gas appliances, you have to put in a bunch of extra chimneys. As I mentioned, you have to vent the gas from your hot water heater, from your furnace. That adds to the cost. And then third, of course, you got to run all the pipes around the house to the various devices. So three big categories, and they add up to between $6,000 and $15,000 per house. And the National Association of Home Builders came out with this remarkable statistic that every $1,000 increase actually makes it almost, prices out almost 10,000 Californians from being able to buy a house. So every increment of additional cost associated with putting in gas actually makes it less affordable. So we have this great opportunity to address climate, health, and helping make our housing more affordable. Oops. So what's happening? Back on July 16th, the remarkable thing happened up in the city of Berkeley. It became the first city in the country to say, no more digging the hole deeper. We're not going to keep adding every minute of every hour a new gas customer across this country. And in Berkeley, we're going to draw a bright line and say, no more. And so starting January of next year, it will no longer be possible to build any building with gas service. That is a really important marker. And there was a lot of questions about, was anyone going to care? This was Berkeley. Well, it turns out it actually got an enormous amount of press. It got press in the Wall Street Journal, LA Times, Reuters, The Guardian. It was an example of cities leading addressing climate change that sparked enormous interest across the country. And so a huge turnout of local residents. It was unanimous, and not a single person spoke out against it. Even Pacific Gas and Electric showed up to say they supported it, which I would argue was as big a news as a city council saying they supported it. Because Pacific Gas and Electric is one of the 5 largest sellers of natural gas in the entire United States. And what they were signaling by supporting this ordinance is that they too know that the days of gas are coming to an end, and they support city action to do something about it. They were the first utility that runs a gas distribution system to actually say they were thinking about getting rid of it. They would support an orderly transition away. So the Berkeley News is now, we have 9 other jurisdictions, cities and counties that have done essentially the same thing. My home city of Oakland is poised to do the same in November. San Francisco is right behind. Within a year, it is possible that 40% of California is covered by jurisdictions that say no to new gas in buildings. A profound change in landscape in literally a case of 12 months. So the biggest city so far is San Jose. This is a big issue across the Bay Area. This is a step of citizens who are as concerned about climate change as we all are, cities leading by example. It's a tremendous first step to say, let's not make the problem worse, and then let's turn our attention to how do we get all the gas out of the existing buildings, and do so in an orderly way. And let me close with just a quick conclusion, and then one last point on equity. So gas for years was being held up as this cleaner burning, natural product. It turns out it's a profound climate issue, health issue, and safety issue. The solutions to electrify and replace it, we don't need to send a spaceship to Mars. We don't need to invent some new technology. It's all right here, right here. And many parts of the country, down in the southeast, for example, are already doing a lot of it. And the technology, as you can see, is awesome. Step one is we got to stop the problem making worse, right? You can't get out of the hole if you don't stop the problem getting worse. So wherever you have the opportunity to help your local jurisdictions, step one, no new buildings with gas. And then lastly, just because buildings are such quintessentially a local issue, this is not something regulated by Washington, we can solve this problem locally. And so while we may despair about what's going on 3,000 miles from here, this is an issue we can make enormous progress on in our cities right here. But let me leave the sort of the last issue, and this is really important from an equity perspective. And one of the reasons I think Pacific Gas and Electric came out in support of cities beginning to address this in an orderly way. We are spending a lot of money to maintain the gas distribution system, running the pipes under our streets to everyone's homes. If we don't do this in an orderly way and wind down that system, block by block, community by community, you're going to have people leaving the system, and those who are left are going to be left bearing the same costs to maintain that vast system. And that will likely be people who cannot afford, renters and folks of limited means. So it is really important as we begin this conversation not only to think about how we do the new construction, but also begin to think about how do we unwind this in a way that is fair to those who can least afford it and oftentimes live in the smallest apartments where the air quality is the worst. So getting the equity piece right at the front end so that those who can least afford it are the ones also able to enjoy the benefits is so very, very important. So with that, let me leave you with just the last anecdote. So I have electrified my home, and it's one of those examples of to get this done right, we got to work very closely with our cities. And in many cities, this conversation has just started, not like in Palo Alto, where clearly the conversation is well underway. I think I pulled the first permit for a heat pump hot water heater in Oakland. I went up to the counter and I said, can I get an electric heat pump hot water permit? And they said, we don't allow installation of electric. And I said, he was super nice. And he said, but you can't install electric. And I said, but I'm installing electric. And first of all, I don't think many people got permits, but you should get a permit. I think it's a good thing to get a permit. So the manager came over and said, I'm sorry, you can't install electric in Oakland, in California. And he said, let me look at, we can read the code together. And as Christine mentioned, I'm a lawyer by training, so we read the code, and of course it didn't say you couldn't install electric heat pumps. It said you can't install resistance electric, the old-fashioned, super inefficient type. So we finally got through that. But then after 3 inspections, the last inspector showed up, and on the checklist was, does your hot water heater have a gas shutoff valve? And my contractor had warned me, do not engage in this conversation. We're trying to get the permit signed off on. And the permit inspector, she was terrific, but she was like, I can't sign off it. There's no gas shutoff valve. And so we're going to have to do this all together, and we're going to have to work with all the folks who are in the supply chain and throughout the process. But we're sort of turning this big ship, but we can do it really fast, and we can take a big chunk out of the climate problem if we work on this together. So thank you very much, and I think we might have time for questions. Okay.
Hi. I got curious because I love my hybrid car. What is the proportion of our whole issue with petroleum and things out of the earth, including our vehicles, alongside the things that you talked about?
So I had always, the sort of traditional what to do in your home to do on climate is minimize your car and get an electric one if you can afford it. Put solar on your roof and make your home super efficient. And those were sort of held up as the two big pieces. And to me, what was particularly shocking was to find out there was actually a third big piece of fossil fuel combustion in my life that no one ever talked about, other than saying be more efficient. And so I think the average car today is 3 or 4 tons per house, 3 or 4 tons per year per internal combustion engine. In the average California home, the burning of gas is around 4 to 5 tons of carbon per year. So the burning of gas is actually bigger than most cars in California. So it's on that scale, but we just haven't talked about it. So I hope that gives you some sense of scale.
So you said that everything down there was available here in the room. The one thing I haven't seen is like electric barbecues. Are those, is there anybody in the room that knows
right.
anything about those? Are those available?
Here
Here we go.
Exit.
Maybe I missed. All right, thank you.
This is page 38. And if you go out to Menlo Spark, you want the book on all-electric multifamily. We're about to come out with a single-family guide. But Menlo Spark has hired us to make guides on how to do everything. The fireplaces, the barbecues.
Ladies and gentlemen,
panels.
Sean Armstrong, who's talking at 4 o'clock. If you have any detailed technical questions, this is the person. No, please keep it. 4 o'clock.
There we go. I wasn't trying to take over Bruce's time. so
No. I needed help, and you were. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that one of the biggest impediments to getting rid of natural gas is that the alternatives are so much more expensive.
So,
There's no way to get that back.
So that was the conventional wisdom, that gas was cheaper than electric. We did a study at Rocky Mountain Institute last fall looking at 4 cities representing 4 climate zones in the United States, including Oakland, Houston, Providence, Rhode Island, and Chicago, looking at 2 different scenarios. One was for new construction and one was retrofitting existing buildings with electric heat pump, hot water, and HVAC. And we found in every jurisdiction it was either cheaper or within less than 10%. So it's right on the margin in terms of capital and operating costs over 10 years. Now, what we're finding is in a lot of places there's crazy incentives driving people to gas. I was in Minnesota with a bunch of developers, and I said, why do you install gas? Every one of them said, because the utility pays us to. The utility pays us to. When I electrified my home, I went to PG&E and I said, I'm buying in a heat pump, which is objectively 3 times more efficient than a gas appliance. 3 times more efficient. And we have a $1 billion efficiency fund in this state, biggest in this country. I couldn't get any incentives to buy something that was objectively 3 times because we had a prohibition on fuel switching. So if we do this right and align the incentives, we will make it even cheaper than what we found last fall, which was new construction and retrofits in most parts of this country are cheaper today, life cycle of heat pumps versus their gas alternatives. And it's a hands down winner if you use propane or fuel oil or resistance electric.
Oh, well, yeah, but Palo Alto's got some of the highest electric rates in the country. Yes. No. The average the cost of electricity in the United States is about 2/3 of what it is in Palo Alto.
So the gas industry will often have this very seductive argument. Per BTU.
No, it's not. It's 17. On my bill.
I'll
I
show
don't
you
know
my
where
bill.
got that.
But there's an important point, which is they will say a BTU of gas is cheaper than a BTU of electricity. That is true. But the electric appliances are 3 times more efficient. So that's where they sort of forget that second part of the argument, right? So you could have a BTU that's 3 times more expensive and it would be the same of electricity and it would be the same price. So
But you don't save enough over the lifetime of the new equipment to compensate for the increased cost. That's the problem. It's just like a lot of the old days of solar before the electric rates went up. You couldn't, and the price of the solar panels came down, you couldn't pay for the installation with your savings.
well, I'm happy to give you the report because we actually did it and we looked at Oakland, which is a similar climate to here.
But the prices I was quoted today for heat pump electric water heater, or heat pump water heater,
Well,
I couldn't pay for that if I saved every.
so
nickel I spent on
you may be touching on a really important issue here, and I think that's something that is worth flagging real quickly, which is heat pumps today and induction stoves today are seen as premium products, and many contractors will don't have a ton of experience, and they will price in risk. And so you are seeing some quotes, and I'm hearing you say that, ones that look pretty sky high compared to their gas alternatives. So that's actually a real issue. We did an analysis of the cost of induction stoves across the United States. They're half the price in England. Why are induction stoves half the price in England? Because the market is for middle and low income consumers in England to have a decent electric stove. Here, their price is a premium product, and so you can spend $5,000 on an induction stove if you want to. So
hard not to.
you can get them cheaper. But the point is, we should be thinking, and that's why the city leading on this and helping really get some transparency. You should not be paying. The guy at PG&E told me he got a quote for $8,000 for a heat pump hot water heater. You know you can buy them for $1,200 at Home Depot. So then the question is the install costs. So it is worth pushing back. If you're getting crazy prices, it may be something going on that. Anyway.
You've got another issue though.
I just want to add
First,
something
you've
because
got
I
to
think
change
if
your
you look at the payback rate, if you add solar and storage and you now are resilient and you're making your own power and you're using the stored power when you're cooking in the afternoon when they're raising the rates on you, you have made your money back in a very short time.
I agree.
And we're gonna have to wrap it up,
Okay.
Somebody else.
but any last questions? Okay, maybe one last question?
Okay, go ahead. I'll get back to you.
Okay, so a quick one on needing a gas valve. They cost $5. Why not just hang from one off the side of the thing? They can turn it, they can check it off, they're done.
I like that because alternatively, he had to go down to City Hall and talk to her manager and explain you didn't need a gas shuffle valve on the heat pump. No, it's, well, hopefully it will never happen again because they've now trained all the inspectors. Yes, sir.
Firstly, thanks for the presentation. The question I have is, we do a lot of this, but the question is, how do we change behavior? You know, it comes back to the point of we have solar, we have water reuse efficiencies, but changing behavior and changing mindsets is such a critical component. How can you maybe help overcome a challenge like this?
Well, my experience of 3 contractors who will try to push gas told me, it's like, wow, we have some unlearning to do. And I think the ban on construction, not allowing gas in new construction, I actually think changes the whole marketplace. Because if you think about the supply chain of the supply houses, the architects, everyone involved in building, the moment new construction is just about electricity and none of them have to think about gas and they sort of unlearn what they knew about gas, I think you're going to change the whole market. So even though people say, well, new construction is only 1% of our emissions, why do you care about new construction? I think it's how you turn the whole ship. Because then everyone is just thinking about how to make homes better, all electric. So that is one step. And then the other is, are you sending the right message with incentives, or are you incentivizing the wrong thing, right? So it's basically looking at where are the barriers in the system, the soft costs, if you will, and how do we help people overcome those.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.